Yeah, so, the 10th Amendment's all about states' rights, and it's a really short amendment. Let me just read it to you here. It's like 4 lines long. It says, "The power not designated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectfully or to the people." Now, if you're a libertarian, if you're like a Rand Paul type, you love the 10th Amendment. I mean, you love it so much that you want to marry it and have babies with it. I mean, it's right up there on top of the things that are most important in your life. And it says what it says. And of course, a lot of people say, well, it's not consistent with what's happening because the federal government is taking so many powers and doing so much. But it does say what is enumerated. So it's sort of like if your parents were to put a Post-it note on the refrigerator and give you the right to cook supper tonight or sleep over with someone else at your friend's house. You would have those stated rights, but the rest of it would be your parents' business. So you have to, understand that the stuff that is in the Constitution reserved for the federal government is the only thing the federal government is supposed to be dealing with. And there's about 30, 35 of those, and just a few of the big examples. They have the right to tax. Here we are coming up on April 15th. We know they got that right. They have that power, I guess is really what I'm saying, the power to do
tax,
that.
all right. Mm-hmm.
They have the power to provide us a common defense, and of course we're all real happy about that. They got to tax before they can do that, so we're happy about the defense part. They have the right to borrow money, which some of us are not so happy about.
Not at all.
But then again, we wouldn't want to pay more taxes either to get the services that we're getting, so maybe we're not so unhappy about them borrowing the money to provide that. They have the right to regulate commerce, declare war, build a post office, coin money. So we say, well, where are they getting all these other opportunities or powers? How is that happening? Well, it's simple. The simple answer is found in Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8, the very last paragraph says, the last paragraph in Section 8 of Article 1 says, "To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers." So if they have the right to make coins, wouldn't it stand to reason that they'd have the right to draw up a seal to put on those coins? And wouldn't it stand to reason that they'd have a right to buy trucks to carry those coins around in? And then when coins become obsolete and we started making paper money, wouldn't it stand to reason that they had the right to print money? So these are powers that are invested. Now the big one for us to concern ourselves with here today is interstate commerce. And the reason I say that is because that's the big one in pretty much all of the constitutional arguments that are presented to the Supreme Court of the United States. And everybody's here. Matt, you're lucky here today because I'm here again. We talked a little else.
I'm listening with fascination.
And in 15 or 20 minutes, I'm going to tell y'all how this 10th Amendment thing works. Whereas otherwise, Ross and I would have spent hours in a doctorate level classroom listening to professors drone on about it. We would have spent hours in the library reading books on this particular subject. And we would have spent a lot more hours late at night studying for and reading case law, cases that interpreted the Supreme Court interpretation of what the Constitution says in its
I got
paragraph.
to say something, Rick, because I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, okay? I just get by. And when I read the Constitution and I say, okay, this is what it means, it always seems like something trumps it. No pun intended there. It always seems like something trumps what it looks like in the Constitution. No, but you didn't think about this or that or the other. So that's why you're talking here. I hope this is going to just open it up and clarify a lot of things. So
for instance, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. I mean, you could sit around and argue all day what's necessary. You could sit around all day and argue what's proper. But if it's one or the other and not both, it's not enough. It's got to be necessary and proper.
I know, and that's voted upon based on who we've got elected into those positions. So it's.
I was going to say, who's the final arbitrator of what's?
The United States Supreme Court. They tell us what these words mean, and they write an opinion about what they mean, and they always write it just a little bit vague. In other words, they don't want to go past the subject matter that's in front of them and try to speak about something else. But then us lawyers, we get a hold of their opinions and we say, well, that's what this means when the Supreme Court writes it. And then pretty soon we're back in front of the Supreme Court, which is why we have a litany or a list of cases that we all look at as lawyers and as the general public and say, well, these are bellwether cases. These are the cases we look to when we try to decide and figure out what it is that Constitution means. So it really has to do with what is necessary and proper in carrying into execution. So let me give you an example. Interstate commerce. Interstate commerce is something that has evolved over the years since the 1700s. Obviously, our commerce from between California and Texas didn't even exist back when they wrote the Constitution.
I got to ask a question because that word inter and intra, isn't there a difference between the two?
Oh yeah, interstate means from one state to another, over the state lines.
And intra is within the state?
Within the state,
Okay,
that's
got it.
right. That's right. So we have, when you drive by a soybean field, for instance, every third row of that soybean field is going to go to China. Every third row of that soybean is going to go somewhere beside China, and every third row is going to stay here in the United States. So there you have all the soybeans in the United States. They're going to be commerced out. So we have reasonable and necessary rules to take care of commerce. So what does that mean in the long run, though? So we have the Department of Agriculture that helps with the agricultural processes here in the United States. Some farmers may disagree, but a lot of others will agree that they help farmers, generally speaking, grow crops because the United States has a big export of crops, so that's important for our commerce. So a hog farmer is growing some corn somewhere up in Iowa, and he's harvesting that corn, and he's feeding it to his hogs. And when the United States Department of Agriculture comes into his place and says, look, you're doing this against the rules of the United States Department of Agriculture, he says, no, I'm not. I'm beyond the Constitution on this, and the federal government has no right to regulate this because I'm not involved in interstate commerce. So, arguments go on through the court system, district court, all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, where they say, yeah, maybe so, but split decision. The majority ruled that he was involved in interstate commerce because he was selling his pigs. The pigs that ate the corn that he argued was not involved in interstate commerce. So there you go. There's the kind of stuff where we all can appreciate and agree that, well, this is just not as black and white as it looks when it says shall be reserved for the state. And that's the lesson of the day.
Help me here, Trey, because I'm a little speechless. I'm running in my brain.
But it was so easy to understand, I'm telling you.
You're talking to the people who have intelligence. Talk to me. The one with rocks in my brain.
I understand the ruling. It seems kind of
Overreaching?
yeah.
Overbearing?
Well, let's
I think that's what the dissent, the folks who didn't agree with the majority on the Supreme Court was saying.
I mean,
that
that's just
this is pushing it a little bit far.
Yeah, you're setting up, and you could say that. Well, you use your tractor, and the fuel from your tractor goes across state lines. You
Amen.
bought that fuel. That's
That's-
interstate commerce.
Yeah, well, is it reasonable? Is it necessary? Is it proper?
Why
hey,
would they push that point? What's the benefit of it? Because of financial gain by doing that?
when you say they, who you
The
mean?
feds.
Oh, well, yeah, they're trying to regulate commerce for the benefit of all of us, is what their point is.
Let's break it down simple. And when we're saying 10th Amendment, clarify what the state actually has the right to do. I know you mentioned it already, but say it in layman's terms, basic, plain, simple terms.
They have the right to do everything that is not specifically enumerated in the Constitution,
But you're saying we're going to go
and
back
that
again.
the federal government can do or needs to do that is necessary and proper to implement those enumerated rights.
But like you just explained, what may look black and white gets all fuzzy because his tractor with the gas screws that whole scenario up, right?
Well, I wouldn't. I mean, it's true. The again, when they wrote the Constitution and they built the Bill of Rights, there was no interstate commerce like there is today. our world has shrunk. Back when this was written, no one knew what China did or wanted to do, or they knew very little about those closed off nations. And now everything's wide open. We get in a car and we can be in Temple in 30 minutes. Back in those days, it took a couple of days to get that far. We can get in an airplane and be in California in just a few hours, or we can be on the other side of the world in a day. Whereas it took Magellan, I think, 3 years. And of course, he didn't make it himself, but it took like 3 years to get around the world.
Can you give me a clear-cut example of a situation now that would be a clear-cut case of state rights saying, hey, you've overreached and we want to stop you because of the rights we have as a state, as written in the Constitution? Anything on top of your head that you can illustrate?
Well, a lot of the criminal laws are states' right laws. Of course, the federal laws come into play too. And I guess the answer is no. I mean, there's nothing in particular except some of the rules and regulations that we have in the state to eliminate and help prosecute crime. But of course, we know that the federal government also has an interest in that because they are involved in interstate commerce, and they are involved in health care and drugs and Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and all the things that are necessary and proper to implement those things.
How about this one? What if a state says, I have the right to secede, and they want to go for it, but you know Uncle Sam is not going to let that happen? Uncle Sam went crazy when Rick Perry just even made the quick comment, we'll secede.
Well,
so how does...
We don't want to talk about who might be crazy in that scenario, but...
No, I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to get at, that would be an example of a state having the state right to say if they wanted to.
Legal drinking age. Legal drinking age is supposed to be
How did I go from seceding to
state
drinking?
right?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's supposed to be, but then the federal government says, well, if you allow people to drink above the age of 18, we're going to cut off federal funding for your highway system. And highway system, guess what, is interstate commerce.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that there's a whole bunch of ways to violate the spirit of the Constitution. You'll get away with.
Well, the spirit of the Constitution, again, you have to understand that our society is changing, and that people have, our population increases, and our taxes increase, and our defense needs increase, our interstate commerce increases, and, it's all part of the same minutia that the Constitution speaks to. And you can certainly argue, and a lot of people have, and it's going on all the time in front of the Supreme Court in the United States, Washington, D.C. area, that the federal government is overreaching. But then again, when the federal government does things for the good of the people, we're not necessarily embarrassed or ashamed of that. It's funny when people say, well, let's go down and meet at the courthouse and protest about there being too much government. It's funny when people stand on the park, the national park, holding a sign that says, keep your dirty hands off of my Medicaid. I mean, people complain and people concern themselves with the states' right issue when it is well developed and well argued by a lot of people who know a whole lot about the Constitution and the issues that are before them. And these decisions that do come out of the Supreme Court are well studied. And we may not agree with all of them. We may agree heavily with some of them, not others. And that's just the way it is because we don't all agree about things. And that's why they have the court system in the first place.
I get just very frustrated at topics like this. I really do, because I look at the Constitution from what I read and that list of things you have in that paper right there as a core element. Yet people, in my opinion, have either for good reason or not. Let's say it's for good reason. They think, well, no, you misread it, and this is what it means. So this is why we needed to do these certain things with the federal government. But then there's other times where there's people like, hey, if I do this and get this passed, it benefits me, my company, the whole concept of that. And so it gets really fuzzy, and I get irritated with that. So if I want to stick with the core element of how it was written, I understand your point about how it's growing and expanding, but there's some things in that Constitution and Bill of Rights that should never, ever be
Well, for
May
instance,
blur.
Matt, the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment. We all are supposed to be treated equal, and the law shall be applied equally, whether they're state laws, city ordinances, or federal ordinances. They shall be applied equally to everyone. And just because you live in Montana doesn't mean that you get better treatment than if you live in Florida. And if you are someone of different nationality, but you're a citizen of the United States, you have the right to equal protection. And a lot of the opinions that come out about the Constitution that allow us to review these enumerated rules and what is necessary proper are considered under the umbrella of the Equal Protection Clause. So you may be frustrated by it because you are who you are, and someone else may be very happy about it because they are who they are. So that's my point. I mean, it's not there to make everybody happy. It's impossible. So yeah, we may be a little concerned about what we could call the degradation of states' rights. But again, whatever degradations are happening are well considered.
I don't sit here easy. I'm
It
ignorant.
is what it is.
I am ignorant on a lot of this stuff. I really want to be better at it, but I don't. That's why I love having you on here. But there's just it gets so intertwined, and when you think you're just about to get it, Rick throws in another aspect of it, and I'm like, what? Man, what about this one here? You're talking about city ordinances. This one puzzles me. If you're a licensed to carry person, for example, can one city A and city B here have two different ordinances, and you're going from city A to city B thinking one thing, and all of a sudden, bam, you're stuck in city B with another ordinance that can get you in possible trouble? Doesn't that cause major confusion?
Yes, it does cause major confusion.
Got that right.
One thing that does cut out a lot of the confusion is that the cities, they can write ordinances, but they cannot write an ordinance that is in conflict with the state law insofar as the conflict allows them to have a lesser penalty. In other words, if a state law says if you do this, you will be charged, and if convicted, you will spend between 20 and life in prison, or let's say 2 years to 20 years in prison, second degree felony. A city ordinance can't say that if you do this same thing, you can get 1 to 15 years because that's less than the state. Now they can say if you do this in our city, and of course I'm talking about years, and cities don't do ordinances that have anything to do with years in prison, but it has to be more than whatever the state says the penalties are. So
How can they do that? I don't understand how they can
well,
do
they're a
that.
governmental entity, and governmental entities have the right to amalgamate laws. And if you live within, or you hang out within, or you cross within those boundaries of that government, you have to abide by their laws.
And ladies and gentlemen, you wonder why you pay a lot of money for an attorney? It's because this guy is a walking encyclopedia of information here. It's unbelievable.
I mean, we did study the Constitution, and again, I'm all about the Constitution. So the Constitution is not vague. The Constitution is well written and well studied, and it fits in a little bitty book. But my gosh, if you go into a law library and you go to the constitutional section, it's like reams of books. Of course, now it's all on your cell phone.
In your opinion, Rick, is that written in legalese to some degree?
Oh, heck no.
So it's written in pretty clean, plain.
Sure it is. And
Plain
the
language.
10th Amendment, when they wrote it, the writers of the 10th Amendment simply wanted to reinstate something that we well knew, and that was that the federal government has limited powers. The federal government has powers that are set out within the Constitution, and otherwise the state should have those rights, just like the little refrigerator note that I talked about a little while ago.
Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. However, it's infringed upon constantly. Freedom of speech.
Well,
I understand you
when
don't
you
yell
say
fire.
it's
You don't yell
infringed,
fire at the air.
when you say it's being infringed upon constantly, I don't agree with that. I mean, again, our society changes.
I'll give you an example. Feinstein. She's just one of the people who said, if I could get rid of them all, if I could make a vote and take guns away from Mr. and Mrs. USA, I'd do it. And she's in a position of power. And whoever elected that,
Well, she hasn't done that.
but she's trying very hard. That's
She's
what
made a statement which
One of
she
the
has an
things
opinion.
that the Constitution allows us to do is to amend the Constitution. Okay? So if anyone's going to be able to take away all of our guns, there will need to be an amendment to the Constitution. So that's a possibility. And again, when we have the ability to do things, again, I've said this before, and I'll give you this example one more time. How about if I get my suitcase with my A bomb in it? I can bear that thing. Or even better yet, if I get me a cruise missile on the back of my semi, I can bear that cruise missile with an A bomb right on the tip of it. Do I have that right, Matt, to do that? And I should be, because the Second Amendment says I have the right to keep and bear arms, right? Is that what you're telling me?
No, what I'm saying is you got these people. You got
right.
these people arguing they had muskets. We should stick with muskets, and we're at AR-15s. Okay, so when you start saying that, that's not equal to a musket. Go ahead. Who's on the
Well,
line?
I mean, but it's a modern weapon.
Welcome to the show. Who we got calling here? Thank you very much for calling.
Yes, could you tell me when you're going to update your internet page?
Man, we're doing
After
a
the
radio
show.
show. You'll have to call up after the show. Thanks. Okay, Rick. Let's.
So when are you going to update your internet page?
As soon as we get done with the show.
All right.
Okay. All right. So we've got. I talked about ordinance. Look, that's why I'm a shooter and not a lawyer. Okay. There's certain things I know how to do, and there's other things that are best laid in your hands. But it confuses me to a great extent sometimes. I guess I'm a purist, which should be actually a realist, because
Well,
a realist
we all
will
think
be able to sleep better.
We think we're all purists. We think we're all realist. And we all think we're all reasonable. And we all think that the stuff we do is necessary. We think that about ourselves. But, the guy that lives down on, the other side of Main Street or First Street or in another town, he may think differently, but he's still a United States citizen, and he still has the equal protection of the Constitution. So the Second Amendment says what it says. And yes, those are arguments out there about the musket. And, the A-bomb has evolved. So if you're going to say you have every right to carry a 200-round clipped semi-automatic weapon or automatic weapon, then what about the A-bomb example? So
Okay,
it can always be carried to an extreme.
Let's cut the A-bomb thing. Let me get back to this. This is what I'm trying to get at. We're going so extreme with the weaponry here. What I'm talking about of infringement is, why should I have a city council, or anybody for that matter, saying I cannot walk around with a handgun concealed? Let's make it to the simplest form. When I'm talking about infringement, I'm talking about, why are you trying to take away or impede my right to be able to defend myself on the street? You are taking away, not you, but the person doing that is taking away my right to walk in a certain area that I need to do personal business with. Let's say I got to go to a medical facility that's in that locale. But you're telling me I can't go in there to defend myself. I'm not the crazy. And even if I was crazy, I'd rather let anybody carry a gun who does their 4473 to have some background check to say, yeah, he's good. Yeah, it slips through the cracks. I would rather take the chance that one nutcase is going to do something, but I've got the ability to stop him, as compared to not having the ability to carry a weapon, and multiple nutcases can take me out at any time. That's what I'm getting at. I want to keep it basic and simple when I say Second Amendment rights. Stop infringing upon my ability to defend myself. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, okay, first off, I love guns. I have a lot of guns, and certainly the concept of someone taking my guns away does not fit well at all with my personality.
I'm not saying taking them away, Rick. I'm saying restricting my ability
I'm just
to
telling the
carry.
audience, though, that I'm a big believer in the Second Amendment, just like I am the whole Constitution. But there are certain limitations here, and when you talk about this ordinance and you get really uptight about it, what you got to understand is if it violates the Constitution, it is illegal and will be removed. We noticed, I think in the news, there's been a situation lately where a city ordinance caused someone to get arrested, and then like the next Monday there was a city council meeting, and guess what? They removed the ordinance.
That's right. And
Because
we're talking
they
about
knew that there was
CJ,
going to be a
right?
battle. Fortunately for the person who got arrested, he was a member of a group that had the kind of money necessary to fight the fight in the court system. And the city recognized that it was fixing to cost them not only a bunch of money, but probably that they were just flat wrong. So, yay, the ordinance was removed. So you should be happy about that.
Well, of course I'm happy about that, but we're deviating from truly what I'm trying to get at.
Well,
And let's say, for example, look, really, you don't need to walk around the street with a machine gun. I get it. You don't need to walk around with M203 grenade launch. I get it. You just don't.
Well, why
right?
do you need to walk around with a semi-automatic shotgun? I mean, why do you need to do that?
Well, it was never a problem back in the day. You could have it in the back of your truck window. But I want to stick specifically to the ability to defend yourself. If your weapon of choice is a rifle, a shotgun, a pistol, and that's what you want to defend yourself, why do you take away my right to do so because you're so hungry? Now listen, if it's a jail, I get it. This is the reasonable stuff, the realistic stuff,
And
not,
proper.
and not the purest stuff. I totally get it. That's common sense. But in general, you got it where because somebody's scared of a gun, you're going to take away my right. I just don't get it.
Well, you can't take away your rights that are given to you by the Constitution.
But you can impede them.
You can impede them. Yeah. So, okay, so what is reasonable and what is proper? I mean, those are all things up to someone's imagination. Is it reasonable and proper for someone to ride their bicycle with a semi-automatic rifle strapped over the shoulder for 200 or 300 miles across Texas? Well, the Constitution gives them that right. So, in my opinion, it would be reasonable and proper. Would the law enforcement people have the right to stop that person and check on them to see if they are one of those crazies that you speak about? Because they don't know.
If
don't
they do
know the
something
person.
for probable cause.
You know, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of feeling comfortable if I see somebody walking down the street here in Cameron carrying a semi-automatic
Rick, how
rifle
old are
strapped
you?
over the shoulder. If
How
the
old are
police go up and say, "Hey, sir, what's your business here with that semi-automatic?" I kind of would hope the police would
You're
do
old
that.
enough to know that people have been driving up and down the roads with guns in their trucks, the whole works, and nobody ever worried about it. It's the last 20 years everybody's been putting on diapers. Okay, they just haven't. They're so scared of everything. They're sitting in their rooms with their laptops or whatever, and they don't get out and see the daylight and go fishing and hunting and all this kind of stuff. And they're scared to death. And the upbringing of respecting a weapon is gone. So don't tell me it's the gun. It's the upbringing of people who have lost it.
Well, and again, that has to do with my comment about our society is changing. And maybe it's changing for the worse, but maybe we should do something about that. I mean,
I'm in the wrong
some of these
century now.
video games I've seen are just wow. I'm like, wow, how did that get out on the market?
Yeah, exactly.
But the reason it got out on the market is because the amendment that allows us to have free speech and commerce, and there's nothing wrong with those as far as that goes. So we can infringe on the people's right to watch and play those video games.
But
Can't
they've
we?
always had pornography. They've always had 8mm films and all that kind of stuff. But you
Right.
get your child going to one of those places to look at that stuff, you're going to jack them up. Nowadays, it's like, hey, you got it on your phone, let me see. That's the way we've gotten to it.
Yeah.
How much time, Trey?
We are over by like 3.5 minutes.
That's fine. We're doing good.
Yeah.
I'll tell you
Rock and
what,
roll.
ladies and gentlemen,
It's a good segment.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate y'all going out to the Mark and to the Simon Jars tomorrow.
tell everybody how they get a hold of you, what you do, Rick, so they know. Rick and his
Well-
firm is a very major sponsor to the program. I can't thank you guys enough for sponsoring the show. And all the other sponsors, too. We couldn't stay on the air without you guys. So tell them how
Well,
to get a hold of you.
we represent people who've been harmed by others or by others' products. This week, we spent quite a bit of time down at the office working some truck wreck cases. Some people were killed by big trucks that slammed into them. And one of the things that we learn from that kind of litigation is that there's usually a reason besides the truck driver blinked. In other words, it's something that is long term, like they're driving too many hours, or they're systematically driving too fast, or they're carrying loads that are too big, or they haven't checked their equipment, the tires are bad. So it's not just like a momentary lapse of negligence. What we find is that this is a long-term situation, and that seems to be true across the board, whether it's a products case like asbestos or some of the chemicals that are out there, or some of the products like cars that roll over and crush people. It has to do with a race for profits or just a systematic overlooking of a dangerous situation for whatever reason. Either it saves time or mostly money for the company. So that's what we do.
Okay, so they got your number, right? Check it out. If you forget, just go to aaronsgunshop.com, go to the radio page, and we've got a link to his website. And if you need help, you can get in contact with him in that manner. So, Rick, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming
Thank you.
on. Trey, take us out. When we come back, we'll probably be touching up with Tactical Snacking and Janae Goodman and all the crazinesses when it comes to food. See you on the other side. Very good, Rick. Thanks.